Welcome back to this week's live stream. I'm Masood Raja, and I've set today's topic as post-colonialism and beyond, but it depends on whatever questions come my way. I don't have a prepared talk or any kind of opening remarks, but I'll be happy to answer any questions. If you're here, please just say hi in the chat so that I know that the chat is working, and then we'll go from there. And I think 2 people are already here, so let's wait for more. And let's see. Okay, so we have Behramand here. Great, welcome. And hello. And then Nitin, I want to research on the topic crisis of imagination for Indians in America. Could you tell me a possible roadmap for the same? Well, you'll have to probably narrow it down because, there are a lot of Indian nationals, both temporary visa holders as well as permanent residents and citizens. So it's a huge constituency. And I don't know what would be the crisis of imagination. What is it that they are imagining wrong? You have to connect it to some issue, crisis of imagination and thinking their Americanness, their Indianness, and then what literary texts are there, probably produced by Indian Americans that kind of give you an entry into that. There is an essay by Benedict Anderson. I think it's in the collection on nationalism. You'll have to do some research on that, where he talks about the diasporic communities and how the diasporic communities usually tend to be more conservative in their approach to what they would consider the motherland or the home country or their native country. That might be helpful to you. Yeah, I'm not sure what Nitin is talking about. Crisis of immigration. Okay, I thought I read it as imagination, particularly in the context of policies introduced by the Trump administration. That would be more, I guess, in the political science. And it's not just relevant to Indians, of course. These policies are impacting everyone, including me, who's a US citizen. So I don't know if you could call it crisis of immigration. That would be too broad a term. It could just be if your research is empirical based, you could do both quantitative and qualitative surveys and interviews, and then figure out how are the people coping with it, what are their strategies, how is it impacting them. There will be, the possibilities are kind of limitless where you could go with it. But since I don't do empirical research of that sort, I probably may not be the right person to ask that question. Uh, I'm familiar with Vivek Chiber's critique of postcolonial theory. There are a lot of critiques of postcolonial theory. Most of them come from the left. And the problem with that is that they think that postcolonialists are only culturalists. I've never bought into that argument. Yes, if you come from classical Marxism, you can critique class and then the global division of labor. But even the most esoteric of post-colonial theorists, I mean, Gayatri Spivak, if you have read her, even just Can the Subaltern Speak, clearly indicts Foucault and Deleuze because they don't take into account the global division of labor. So yeah, it's a nice critique coming from the left, but I don't agree or disagree with it. I think we can do both. I think, and that's why I have a video in which I clearly discussed why I'm not just a Marxist. I mean, I use Marx, I use contemporary Marxism in my work, but I never I'm not a card carrying socialist and all. I would use culture where it suits me. I will use post-structuralism, which allows me to do my work. As long as my work is connected to the people, it doesn't matter if it is theorized through a socialistic or Marxist view of the world. I think sometimes that can be very limiting. So I respect his work, but you know, there are other critiques of post-colonialism as well. So hello, Dr. Raja. I am thinking about Marxist ideas, hegemony and dominance by Gramsci and Althusser's ideological state of practices. So can we say that hegemony is brought about by ISA? Yes, of course. I mean, that is Althusser's claim, is that most of the time the state and the powerful institutions work through ideological means. There is no you and me saying anything about it. That is his main argument. But in order to really understand Althusser, you'll have to see how he is theorizing ideology, which is different from Marx. And plus, his explanation of ideology is also mediated through Lacan. So there is a reading of Lacan involved over there, which of course Marx didn't have access to. So on the surface of it, I think there is no point in proving whether the society is reproduced by ideology. Even in Antonio Gramsci, it is connected to the intellectuals and to the cultural sphere and the civic society. So that shouldn't be your point because that is sort of axiomatic that hegemony is produced through ideology. I think what is important is how you explain it and then use to explain whatever you're writing about. Okay, Baraman. Yes, of course you can integrate migration into feminist theory. You can basically focus on the female experience of migration, how it is peculiar, what bodily and emotional dangers are there. If you really want an older text, there is Bharti Mukherjee's novel Jasmine, which is about a purely female experience of migration. And that could be a starting point. But there are other texts as well. Hello, Hamza, welcome. Okay, so yeah, we have, I don't know, it's showing me, I think we have 9 people today. So this time I announced it early because I thought I should, give you all a little warning. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to post them and I'll try to answer those. I have to keep my water protected from my cats. He's sitting right there on that table. So I have to hide it from him. What are the prerequisites of a good research proposal? I don't know, is it for a doctoral research proposal or I think the uh, so it depends. I mean, it depends on the level. You know, if it's a doctoral um, proposal, you will probably have to figure out what field is it or what subfield. And then within that, obviously, you'll have to do your research and find out where the debate in a certain aspect of that field is. So, a good proposal, of course, will be cutting edge. And how do you get to the cutting edge? You go and read and find out where the debate is. And then after that, it's just a question of proposing it, following whatever institution you're applying to or proposing it to. You'll have to see what their format is, in what format do you want, because those are also important. And then that would make it. But most importantly, just not just what you're proposing to do, but also what has been done before and how are you placing your research within that discussion. I think that's important for any good proposal. And yes, yes, you can, someone asked me, can I ask a question about research? Yes, absolutely. And then someone asked me, can you see my cat? Well, the problem is he's very independent, so he doesn't come. He's a Bengal and he does what he wants. Right now, he's sitting at the table next to me on the other side of the camera. So let me see if I can reverse the camera and show the kitty cat to you. And so there he is. If you can see him, he's sitting there looking at the camera. So that his name is Arjun and he is a purebred Bengal. Okay, so there's another question. What is a difference between summary and theorization? Uh, Obviously, summary is when you're reading something and you summarize it, right? And you just give a gist of what a novel is about or what a short story is about. And theorization is when you come up with a theoretical concept, when you explain it and you give a new concept. That is what theorization is about. Anything about how to read, how to study. It can be a term, it can be a whole concept. So, for example, when Edward Said writes Orientalism, he is theorizing the term Orientalism, right? And summary is just, summarizing a book, summarizing a poem, summarizing a short story. Most of the times when I taught writing, I told my students not to summarize the text, not to tell the reader what happens, just assume that the reader knows what happens and then discuss your point of view about the text. And that's something that was taught to me. And sometimes maybe a brief introduction to an esoteric text might be necessary, but most of the times you just assume that your audience knows the text that you're talking about. Okay, have you ever studied Sylvia Wynter's work? Not really, but just let me know what the title is, or I'll look it up and I'll explore into it. That's okay, Baraman. I mean, we can stick to our topic, but also, people are here and there are very few of us. So, absolutely, if people want to ask questions related to research and everything else, that's welcome too. That's why the topic was post colonialism and beyond. So, I mean, I don't even restrict discussions in my classroom if students sometimes have questions completely unrelated to what we are discussing. Because I mean, that's how the mind works. It goes places. Yeah, Nitin, yes, absolutely. I'm aware of Deepak Chakrabarty's texts, and I've read it. I've read most of them, especially Nation and its Fragments. Actually, I used it in my dissertation as well. And I think that could be a very useful text. I mean, I used his response to the Cambridge thesis of nationalism, where the idea was that westernized elite somehow introduced nationalism to India. And his argument was that the nationalism actually emerges in the private sphere instead of the public sphere, and private sphere was absolutely not available to the colonizers. And I agree with him. Okay, any other questions? And that was summary and okay. So what are the main key debates in post-colonial studies today? That's a really good question. And to be very honest, I probably am not the ideal person to ask that question because I'm not actively publishing these days. But when I was active about 3 years ago, the main debate was whether post-colonialism exists or not. And there was a lot of pressure. People were trying to rebrand it as decolonial studies. And of course, decolonial studies is very prominent in Latin American studies. And people were trying to convince me and others that, there is no post-colonial studies. But whatever it is called, as long as you're dealing with the legacies of colonialism and now the struggles of the post colonies, in one way or the other, you are dealing with post colonialism. I think the contemporary most important, where I have delved into, is the issues of rising fundamentalisms and and the darker side of decolonial studies, where it just kind of believes that our native histories may be are the only pure form of knowledge and we should jettison all other knowledge. I think that's not effective and that can lead us to some really darker paths. Um, my aunt said, "Why would you make babies when you're at war?" I could not give an answer to her. Is that brave or responsible? I don't know. I mean, I think in a way, making babies or having babies is kind of a commitment to future, right? That the present might be hard and the future might look dark, but what is it that we give to the future, like another generation? And most of the times, these kind of views, you know, are proffered from a privileged position, which presupposes that in order to have a baby, you must first have a house, a car, electricity, and all. No, human beings obviously socially procreate. That is part of being who we are. So I don't think it is irresponsible. I think, like, when you have a baby, at least taking care of them is important, giving them love, right? That's important. Sometimes it depends on where you are. Sometimes producing children is an act of survival. If you are a constituency that a powerful constituency is trying to wipe out, why would you give up on producing the future generations? So it depends on the context, but I think having children is an investment in the future of the world. I mean, look at the countries who have negative birth rate. Look at the kind of crisis. Japan has an aging population. And so I guess we all need to kind of balance it out so that, we don't destroy the earth with our population. But beyond that, I think I think that I will never say that to anyone. Right? Aren't we in the neo-colonialist era or techno-colonialism rather? Yes, I mean, I don't know if it's neo-colonialism. I don't see it as a different form of colonialism. And those debates are already incorporated within post-colonial studies, is how when physical colonization ends, right, the strings are still attached. If you read Chinwe Zhu, for example, or Ngugi Thiong'o has a wonderful critique of that kind of colonialism in his Decolonizing the Mind, but also if you read Devil on the Cross, that is a great text that tells us about the power of global capitalism and still, you know, 80% of the profits of global corporations still travel back to the metropolitan cultures. So, yes, neo or not, there are different forms of colonialism, and it has not ended. And for some nations, it has not even ended physically, it's still there. And then there are internal colonialisms, right? If you look at Pakistan, where I am from, in the last 72 years, we still haven't broken the back of feudal systems. If you go to the South, people literally, work for people. They are literally, in a way, owned by people. And similarly, in India, the caste and also, the influence of landed and moneyed groups still exists. So, in one way or the other, there are internal colonialism. And then if you look at the gender and how it is used to suppress and oppress women, that's another form of internal colonialism. So our universities do not allow post-colonial research. According to them, it is exhausted. What are your opinions in this regard? So these people who are telling you post-colonial research is exhausted, have they ever told you that Shakespeare research is exhausted or Ben Jonson research is exhausted or you can't write about Hemingway or Faulkner? How come those researches are not exhausted, but post-colonialism is? I mean, most of the times, people who claim to be post colonialists in Pakistan, especially, don't even know the field. They just read those early scholars, Helen Tiffin and Bill Ashcroft. No one ever cites them in post colonial studies. So these people have not read the contemporary debates. They don't realize that post colonialism is a vast field. And no, you can never exhaust a field of study. It's an arbitrary decision. Maybe the faculty members don't want to deal with it, or maybe they think, you know, there is no need for it, but there is no line drawn in the sand that says, okay, on this date, post colonialism exhausted itself. It's just a faculty choice or their prejudice. I will never tell a student post colonialism is exhausted because people keep coming up with new issues and new things to talk about. I think they are doing a disservice to their students. Now, I would understand if a department says, hey, there are 15 doctoral students, all of them are doing post colonial studies, they should do something else. but then bring in professors and teachers who can excite people about other topics, right? At the end of the day, you decide who you want to study with, but sometimes in India and Pakistan, that's not even a choice because you're assigned a supervisor. So the system is different. But I would never concede to this idea that post-colonialism has exhausted itself. How can I construct a literature review on a Pakistani children's novel when only one published paper is available and it focuses on post-colonial studies, while my research lens is trauma? So I'm not sure if I'm a good person to advise you on that, but you mentioned trauma. So part of your literature review is your understanding of trauma theory. So because you don't just give a literature review of the text that you're writing about, you give a literature review of your theoretical assumptions, and for that you go to their progression and your reading of it. So when you mention literature review, is it you just listing together a bunch of articles that are related to your topic? Because that doesn't help you. A literature review is where you read, because you're reviewing it. So you read. So to use trauma theory, you have to learn what it is, right? So then you start with who has discussed trauma theory, generally speaking, then within the context of South Asia. Or is there someone who has done trauma in children? I can promise you there are hundreds of studies just in Palestinian children's trauma, right? And that becomes part of your literature review. And then you also can very easily mention not much is written about the novel that I am writing about. But on the other hand, writing a dissertation on one novel, I mean, you're limiting yourself, or one topic. I mean, you'll probably have to find more than that. Are the current policies of Trump administration protection or some sort of neoconservatist? I don't see them as protection. I mean, they are protectionist in terms of economics, but I don't think so. They are well-meaning or well-guided. I think they are destructive to United States as well as to the world. And it's not even neoconservatism, because neocons were the ones who were with George Bush, and neocons were at least for free trade. So this is a more ethnocentric and Americocentric way of looking at the world, with a more transactional worldview. So I think we are way beyond neocons and into a kind of reactionary politics, which doesn't have a big philosophical basis behind it other than prejudices and this deep sense of having been wronged. And I don't consider it like a deep philosophical political movement. You know, it's driven by grievances and a false sense of having been wronged. And so that's how I see it. Are there any regional Indian Latin American academic differences in terms of approaching post decolonization? Well, Latin American studies actually is the one that spearheaded the decolonial thinking, right? That comes from Walter Manvolo and others. And they also then deal with not just colonization, but they also deal with internal differences, miscegenation, and then indigenous rights. Postcolonial theory, of course, does that. We borrow from Latin American studies and heavily. But in itself, Latin American studies, since it is also sort of a critique of area studies, and since, of course, it deals with Spanish and Portuguese texts. So its study of colonization precedes the capitalistic colonization because it must go to the mercantile early phases of capital and colonization. So Spain and Portugal were colonizing America long before capital rises. Postcolonial studies, by and large, has stayed with 18th, 19th century colonialism. And part of the reason is because the early theorists kind of drew a line about studying colonization after the rise of capitalism. So that's a distinction between the two. But in terms of Latin American feminism and imagining a world in sync with nature, Latin American studies, in my opinion, is way ahead of any other field of study. Is there a separate term for natives behaving as colonizers towards their own people, or would it fall under internal colonialism, as you say? I mean, you could, Spivak uses native informant, but, and there is a term, I have a video on it, that is called the Comprador class. This is the class that served the colonial masters and then takes over after the colonizers leave. Their sympathies are still with the former colonizers. Then you can, if you go to Chinwe Zhu's work, Decolonizing the African Mind, he distinguishes between the two colonized constituencies, the natives, indigenous, and who were colonized. He aligns them with Caliban, and then those who were part of the native elite who buy into the colonial project, and then after the colonizers leave, who take over, and he aligns them with Ariel, so aerialized natives. But these are some of the terms that people have used, and they still, but I would say look into the Comprador class. Speaking of new research on Shakespeare, I know of people who are researching fashion as used in Shakespeare's play. I love how creative that is. Yes, absolutely. And people also, Shakespeare is one of the most written about authors, of course. So, as someone previously mentioned, postcolonialism is exhausted. If Shakespeare studies is not exhausted itself after 400 years, I don't think so. Postcolonialism is exhausted. But yes, there was a phase where people were writing about sexuality in Shakespeare. There are phases. There are people writing about how aging is dealt with. At the end of the day, there are 26 plays, and we have been writing about them for 400 years, and we are still producing Shakespeare scholars. So, the texts are there. The audience keeps shifting. And then what you bring to a text as a reader or as a critic or as a scholar is what changes a field, keeps it alive, and also how universities privilege it. So a lot of it is not just about Shakespeare, it's also about the whole industry of Shakespeare studies, including the universities and the presses. So yeah, I mean, people go into interesting territories. So what is situatedness? I mean, I can't give you the pedigree of the term, but situatedness is always, let's say, if you have read Said's discussion of worldliness, right? The texts are worldly. And the scholars themselves then are situated. We know where we are. So when you write from a perspective where you know of your own privilege and your own privileged position, that is where you are situated. Writing as if what you are saying is natural won't be a situated positioning. And then situatedness is also related to if you're studying a native culture, how do they view their word, right? So roughly that's my understanding of it. It's pretty thin. Would a literature review only incorporate published papers, or could one also include books and other media, podcasts, YouTube videos, paintings? You will have to discuss this with your supervisor. I will allow my students to use it, not as a main source, but as something that supplements their research. But I think only your supervisors can answer on that because they're the ones who will tell you whether it's appropriate or not. Okay. Good questions, though. You all are making me work. Okay, so we are at about 36 minutes. Sorry, excuse me. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes just in case I'm, I missed anything or if you have any more questions. And then I'll try to make it a regular feature. What are some of the current debates with respect to American society these days? So, I mean, you all watch the news, right? So the biggest debate here is that US democracy is in crisis. That's in terms of politics and the threat that Trump and his ilk pose to not just to the US Constitution and to the world. Then the biggest debate here, of course, in the public sphere is healthcare. Can people afford healthcare? I mean, simple things are highly expensive. The unemployment is rising. So all of these issues that you know affect people elsewhere. But I think the biggest issue right now is that America is extremely divided, and there is one vision of America that Mr. Trump has, and his lieutenants are putting them in place. I think it is destructive. And then there is a whole constituency of people who are opposed to it, and they are trying their best to, add some check to this new America that is emerging. So these are some of the issues that people are dealing with, that scholars are dealing with. The universities are under constant pressure to not add things like gender studies and diversity and things like that. So I would say the progressive aspects of America are under attack, and that's the biggest crisis. So, how do you see post colonialism in the current era? Who are the major theorists? I mean, like, I only consider three or four as major theorists, right? The contemporary theorists are great, but I'm not up on my reading on that. The beauty of post colonial studies was that we appropriate everyone. So, I mean, Said, Spivak, Baba, Partha Chatterjee, people like, Robert Young, um, and then scholars from India, Pakistan. So it's a vast array of people, Fanon, and then of course Marx. But I don't know who the current. There are a lot of people in gender studies, but I haven't read them, so I can't hazard an opinion on that. A lot of scholars from Britain, from India, of course. So many of them, the entire subaltern studies collective. So take your pick, but as I mentioned, as I'm not reading actively in my field, I don't know where actually the contemporary debates are. Yeah, so how is the price of eggs? Well, they are still expensive. So we are hoping Mr. Trump will reduce the prices. And does Foucault, in his theory of power, offer a resolution within power relations? Yes. I mean, you can read his later lectures, but for Foucault, power is in itself productive, which means that while it is discursively producing human subjects and acting on our bodies, it also produces its own resistances. That is the productive aspect of power. And to really theorize or deal with resistance within a discursive structure of power, you'll have to kind of read Deleuze and the whole idea of the rhizomatic resistance. So, yes, absolutely. And then if you read his lectures where he discusses the normalized dominant knowledges and the role of what he calls bruised knowledges, knowledges that historically were suppressed, and how to retrieve those knowledges and juxtapose them with dominant knowledges. That's another way of challenging a dominant discourse. So, I mean, also remember there is no center of power in Foucault. Power is not architectural, it is not hierarchical, it's everywhere, right? And I had argued in one of my essays long time ago that, the power also has a natural flow. Yes, it permeates the body politic and impacts our bodies, but it also travels to what it thinks is the source. So it also concentrates. And the role of revolutionary politics or any kind of egalitarian politics is to bend power against its natural flow, right? To 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 move it away from concentrating. And I don't know if it's possible or not, but that's where popular resistance comes in. Whose analytical model is suitable for textual analysis? It's your choice. Who have you studied with? What have you read? And then based on that, what is it that you want to do in your discussion of a text? There is no single analytical model. There are various ways of looking at texts and approaching them. You ask yourself, what is it that you want to do, right? What is it that you want to prove or suggest? And then which tool will enable you to do that well and better? So, it's absolutely arbitrary. It depends on what is it that you want to accomplish in a written text. Yeah, Derrida is good. you know, for certain things. For certain things, if you read Levinas and Derrida, absolutely. But, will Derrida give you a good understanding of class struggle? Maybe not. Maybe, Spectres of Marx is a good book. But if you want to study class struggle in contemporary times, obviously you'll go to Marx and then you'll go to contemporary Marxism and see like how people like Carlo Vercellone, Franco Berardi, that whole entire strain of Italian Marxists, how are they thinking class? So it depends on what you want to do, and any analytical theory you use, you can't just read an article here and there or a summary of their work. If you're going to use Derrida, you will have to read carefully and understand Derrida. And that takes a lot of time. And because I mean, if you are crafting a tool to do something, you don't want, a hastily engineered tool. You need something that you clearly understand, have opinions about, have read critiques of, and then you use it, right? So I think we are at the 45-minute point. These days I'm reading, and I could not tell you the name of the author. I think last name is Ford. I'm reading this series of books, which is about, what is it about? Okay, so it's the main character is called Thursday Next. It's an alternative world in which people are crazy about books. And there is a whole department in Britain whose job it is to protect the integrity of the text and then go and investigate forgeries and all. So I'm on book 2 of it. I think, what is it? Lost in a Good Book. That's the title of it. So that's what I'm reading these days. And it's really fun and really, really smartly done. So, okay, I think we've gone for like 40 minutes, right? And this will be available in a recorded form, of course, after a while. And by the way, I will post a link to those books that I'm reading in the description. How would you personally go about choosing literary text fictions for research purposes? Uh, I mean, you can look at my published work, some of them are not about literary text. My book on ISIS is about ISIS, right? But it goes and also reads what others have written about it. And then it goes and reads what ISIS themselves produced, right? So those were my primary text in that. If you look at my last book, Democratic Criticism, I started with reading Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses because I was trying to prove a point about reception and how different groups and constituencies can receive a text differently, and that we need to be attentive to that. So, how you choose your text is, you know, what fascinates you, what is it that you want to write about? And that gives you an idea of, okay, these 5 novels, I want to read these. And then I want to decide what is it that I want to say about them, what has been said about them. So it's never really, I need to go and read this novel and write about it. Most of the times, what I published in short form, like in essays, and was always, okay, I'm reading this novel, God's Bits of Wood, and I feel like writing this about it. And then you go and do your research and see what others have written about it. And then you figure out, oh, this is where I come in and I add to the conversation. Um, in the era of AI, can we accept um, good research? Absolutely. I mean, yeah, people will cheat and they will, but at that level where you publish books and all, you can't just write them with AI. You will have to have a deeper understanding of the subject. But I don't know. I haven't been out there in on college campuses to figure out, how people are writing their research papers. And if you're using AI to write their research papers, I mean, what kind of scholars and teachers will they become? Is subaltern studies a subgroup of post-colonial studies? No, I wouldn't consider it a subgroup. It is an autonomous group that has done groundbreaking work. We kind of just adopted them and used some of their work and the critiques of their work. So, I mean, as I said, post-colonial studies is highly voracious and it steals from everyone. So Subaltern Studies Group actually is an autonomous group, and they have continued to do their work. But whatever they have done enables us to reach out in history and look at things not from a dominant historical perspective, but also from what they've retrieved. Okay. All right. That's all. Thank you so much. And I'll be back next time whenever it's possible. In the meantime, stay connected to the channel. And I really, really enjoy interacting with you all. And I'm grateful for your support. So I will see you next time. Okay. Peace and love.